loud. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with Nami. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host for the evening. I'm the Director of Programs with Nami, North Carolina. That stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, North Carolina. Thursdays with Nami is our way of having real conversations with real people on the topic of mental health. Our guest tonight is Quentin Monden. He's a board member with Nami, Ohio, and a state trainer for the Nami Connection Recovery Support Group. I was working for Nami, Ohio when I met Quentin in 2014. He was one of the first to step up and volunteer to help us out when we needed folks to facilitate the support groups. We were actually having to close a couple down. We were in a tight spot, and Quentin was right there to help, very talented. He stood out to me for his focus and determination, but also for some memorable things he would say. For example, that's a win. I can recall this in a group that we had once. If you're having a bad day and all you can do is get out of bed, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's a win. Just very, very firm confidence for a young person. We're going to hear more of those noteworthy phrases in just a few minutes. As usual, the first part of our show will be an interview with our guest. About halfway through, we'll show our video of the week, and then we'll be taking questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. Now, I want to take a moment to thank our funders. Thursdays with Nami is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We appreciate their guidance and their support. Now, without further ado, I have so much respect for Quentin, and I'm really glad that he's here tonight. He is a certified practitioner of profit from the positive. As such, he helps managers and entrepreneurs become more productive and profitable using 31 tools from positive psychology. He also represents Nami, Ohio as the peer representative to the National Peer Leadership Council. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Peg. It's great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Been a little while. So we always like to understand the backstory of folks who come on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself in a nutshell.
So I'm a minister's son, and we've moved around since I was about 5 years old. So I was originally born in Chicago, and then we moved to Detroit where my younger brother was born. Then we moved to Kansas City, and then New Jersey where I went to high school and college. And so I originally came to Ohio after a medical leave while I was in university. And so by 2013, moved to Columbus. And so that's when I started seeking out support groups and went to, I think, the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance group at first, and then later started going to the NAMI Connections Recovery Support Groups. And so that's how I eventually met you back in 2014. I started going to the NAMI support groups. And so that's kind of how my journey started with the support group programs that NAMI provides.
And so you kind of covered my second question, so I'm going to go on to the third. You and I kind of have something in common. To me, I think of it as morning issues. For as long as I really remember, I wake up feeling rough. Like that's where my depression is loud, and it's hard for me to get the day off to a good start. What is your relationship with mornings these days?
Yeah, it's still rough. I think the only thing that makes it better is my dog Nash, because I wake up in the morning to let him out. And so it's like I can't just lay there anymore.
Yes.
So thanks to him, I get started with the day, get up and get out and get moving. But I know normally during this time, you talk about seasonal affective disorder. That's always affected me, I think, since I was like a child, really, in elementary school. So like the fall going into the winter has always been a rough period for me. Low light, gets colder, less motivated to get out of bed because it's cold. And so, I mean, I think combination with not just my dog, but also having something to look forward to the next day. So on my schedule, like, oh, this is the things I want to check off today. That's good. And then um, giving me a little bit more motivation to get out. But usually, yeah, it's rough. So
Yeah, same with the dog. It takes the option away. You can't really sleep in all that late when you have a dog and you've
mm,
got to get outside. And then I immediately feel better, unless it's just pouring rain. Then I might not feel so great. But
right.
yeah. And that's another expression, actually. I remember us talking about mornings in a conversation with other people, and you had this joke about mornings. It's cold.
I still say that one. I'm like, but it's cold. The blankets are
Yeah,
warm.
that's right. Right. This is my safe small world. All right. So one thing I always think of with you too is your perseverance. You did not grow up in a family where people talked about mental health and you were encouraged to get care. Like me, you grew up with silence on that topic, which is it makes it so hard to see yourself and identify your own needs. At least for me, it did. And I remember you, at times saying you were on your own dealing with that. How did you go from walking that journey alone to teaching others about recovery?
It was very challenging initially because, you know, your mind, the depressed mind, you tend to think that you're isolated in your experience. Logically, that's not true, but it's hard to kind of feel like you aren't when you don't have people to talk to or anyone really speaking about it. When I was originally diagnosed, formally, it was 2007, and back then, I was still in university, and we had resources on campus, but it wasn't really widely talked about like it is now. Just to give like a little precedence of like what time and the mood, the climate at that time. And so um it was just very challenging trying to navigate like, oh, you have major depression and some anxiety. And so what does that mean? When I get, on one hand, it was like, oh, thank God, now I know what it is. But then at the same time, it's like, what does this mean for my life now that I have this thing? So now I got to learn a whole bunch of new things. And, you know, do I have to, live differently, eat differently? Do I have to be on medication? So it's like so many questions following the diagnosis. And that's the part that made it hard. It's like, okay, wow, so now I'm talking to a therapist, and then I had to leave school because what they did then was I got put on a medical leave where they withdraw me out of all my classes so it doesn't hurt my overall GPA, and then you leave campus. But before then, they kind of helped me start the process of finding a therapist within my insurance network, and then go back home, and then I start meeting with them. And so you don't really go back until like really a semester or more. So yeah, it was isolating at first, um, but eventually you get used to going to therapy. You start to find a rhythm. You see the benefit. I remember distinctly my therapist. Her name was Dr. Myers, and I was living in Inglewood, New Jersey at the time. So I'll never forget the day where she was like, "This is good. This is what we need. We need more of this. This is what we need to talk about more." So I was like, "Oh, okay. This is," because she got so animated because at first it's not like she wasn't there, but I think I was actually talking about issues that were really affecting me rather than just surface level things. And so she was just like, "This is good stuff. This was a good session." She couldn't really contain her excitement about it. So it stood out. It still, like, to this day, it just stood out. Like, okay, okay, I guess more of that. So,
Made my therapist happy.
so it was pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah, that's fun. It is different trying to identify how what you need when there's no language for it in your upbringing. And then for me, getting help, it was like, A, I have no idea where to go, and B, maybe I'm not worth it. Just, a lot of pushback, I guess, within for that.
Yeah, I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad or things weren't that bad that I needed to go to therapy. And that was part of, the stigma, like,
Yeah.
the self stigma, like, oh, I don't think things are that bad that I need to see somebody. So, yeah, I definitely relate to that.
Yeah. So tell me what your darkest days were like.
Oh, my darkest days, it felt like things were never going to get better. For a while, my routine was I was at home. I would sleep a lot because before I got diagnosed, I think I went months without sleeping or eating, and just all around it looked a mess. I had what I call now a stress fro, where my hair was like way out here, and like I looked
I
horrible.
like that name.
Yeah, it was wild, and I looked a hot mess. Like I hadn't washed my face, which I probably hadn't, and hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't really been taking care of myself physically. And so when I got home and was about to start therapy with my insurance, I slept. It felt like for the whole week, that first initial week, like just for a long period of time, and then after that, get better. I got a haircut, wash my face, things like that, personal hygiene, and then started going to met my therapist and started going regularly. It was good, but um, noticeably, small things like no longer really connected to my friends who are still at university as much, and I'm missing out on things that I would know if I was on campus or still there. Was at home a lot, and that wasn't great because my parents didn't really know what to do, or just it's something we never talked about, so they weren't really the as supportive. If anything, they were like the complete opposite, where they thought like I had dropped out of school even though we had a meeting with the dean of students, but they looked at me coming out of school as like dropping out of school, so they took that really hard. And and yeah, I didn't really have any like friends back home because I wasn't originally from there. So it's just kind of like being at home with my family, going to therapy, and that's really it. And then once in a while talking to people at that time online via Facebook or instant messenger, which we were using. That Yeah, I'm that old, instant messenger. So we're still using instant messenger and Facebook. But so it was pretty isolating. It was one of those situations, once again, where your mind makes you think things are never going to improve or get better, and this is how your life is always going to be. And that's what you start to feel, especially where it was some years before that, the type of routine where I would go home or go to church with the family and then go to therapy didn't really change that much. you know and so you start to think like, great, things are never going to get better in my life. And so those are really dark times, because it almost seemed like that was going to be true of my life, like this is as good as it's going to get.
It is insidious the way the brain works when, for me, when my mental health is a challenge, it's like I'm in the rabbit hole. There's nothing else aside from the rabbit hole. I'm stuck in the rabbit hole. The universe is now a rabbit hole. You
Mm-hmm.
just can't imagine things getting brighter. Yeah, I relate to that so much. So what helped the most as you work to rebuild yourself?
Some things I started adopting, I have to say, I've had positive experience with therapists and psychiatrists. I know that's not true for everyone, but when I eventually did, have therapists and psychiatrists, my psychiatrist was kind of different. At least I felt she was, where she not only asked me how the medication was working, but then she'd also ask me like, "So are we getting out, or did we try to meet some people?" And I'm like, "What is this?" Like, like, can you just say we just talk about the medication and I go talk about this with my therapist? She was really nice though, but it was so funny. Like, but yeah, she would throw that in there, like, "So are we trying?" And like, if we didn't, like, why didn't we do that? And I'm like, "Oh, here we go." So she along with my therapist would keep me accountable. Like, did we go meet some people. And so one of the platforms I use that's still around is called meetup.com. And so back then I remember signing up uh like back in 2008, and I was like, trying to get out, especially when I came to Ohio. I was like, oh, let me see what's some local interest. And so like I remember their tagline being, uh, connect online so you can meet up in life, real life. And so it was basically kind of like having recreational clubs, like you would go to, like your local rec center or even on campus, like interest groups. And so you can meet people that shared your interests. And so I remember the first time I went, I almost had like a panic attack because I hadn't really been out with people in a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember I had gotten dressed, I had showered, gotten dressed and everything, but I sat on my bed and still remember my mother came to my room door and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Are you panicking?" I'm like, "A little bit."
Oh.
I'm laughing now. It wasn't funny then, but I'm laughing now. But I was like, yeah, a little bit because I was just nervous. It was like, man, I haven't been out and actually socialized in like what seemed like forever. But that was one of the things, like as I started um growing in my therapy experience and like levels of therapy where like it starts talk therapy and then you start developing coping skills and then got introduced to like cognitive behavioral therapy. Those are things like where you ask yourself, basically, why wouldn't you go and what's stopping you from going, or why are you nervous? And you do that internal dialogue and you kind of check what they call your thinking errors, like, oh, I probably shouldn't go because I was like, that's not a rational thought, like where's that coming from,
Yes.
so when I began putting that in practice and actually getting out the door more and trying to explore my local area, that's when things started to get better. And saying yes to things more, even though I didn't know how they were going to turn out. I had what I call like a year of yes when things started to get better because I opened myself up to more opportunities. And so, yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That opens a lot of doors. We push ourselves to say yes to everything as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the way you laugh when you tell these difficult stories. That I'm remembering that how much, you would laugh and tell these difficult stories. And I think it kind of demystifies mental health. And it's you're like, it's okay. We all struggle. So it's fun to revisit that. So you were raised, as you mentioned, in a religious household. How has your faith evolved over time? Was it affected by your mental health challenges and recovery?
Yeah, for a while, I know I couldn't really talk about it. Um, I distinctly remember a conversation I had with the dean of students. And the dean of students at the university I attended, Montclair State University in Montclair, New Jersey, she actually also was part of the denomination that I was a part of. So she knew my parents and she knew me from that before I started going to Montclair. And so I remember when I had to come out, I think for my second medical withdrawal, and I just told her, I was like, I felt so defeated and I was frustrated because things didn't go well and I had to leave school again. And I was just like, oh, and so she's like, she just said, she's like, Quentin, she's like, one, I'm surprised you, you know, you made it as long as you did. Is like you were dealing with so much. It's like you got a job, you got a campus job after that one ended, and you were, full load course load. Plus, you had started seeing the campus psychologist and started medication. And, so she was like, you did all of these things and still participated on campus events and stuff. It's like, I don't know how you did it. And I was like, I don't know. I just did. I think, partially one, I wanted a semblance of my life back. But then also too, was just like, I had to do it. There was no other alternative. There was nothing, there wasn't really anything else I could do other than keep moving forward. And so I remember really telling her I had stopped praying, like I hadn't been able to pray. And she looked at me, she's like, she said, don't ever be ashamed to tell me that. She's like, I had been through so much and she helped me see that. But she also said, she firmly believed that God was going to use that in a great way. Um, I didn't because I was too busy feeling bad for myself. So I
Sure.
really didn't. And she was, I mean, she wasn't upset by me being like, I don't see that. But she's like, Leslie, she's like, you'll see. It's like, it may not happen today or tomorrow, but eventually, you'll see how this experience is going to help other people. And I was like, okay, if you say so. So yeah, but it did affect my faith in a way. Like I didn't really attend church as much, and then mainly because church for me, I didn't get a lot of support or help. You know, that was one of the communities that it's gotten better since I was diagnosed, but at the time there wasn't a lot of talk, especially since the denomination I was in is predominantly Black, and you know even though that's changing a little bit, still, people, Black people don't typically talk about mental health issues, at least, especially then when I was dealing with them. And a lot of times they try to over spiritualize things, which is fine to an extent, but it doesn't really speak to like, immediate issues like this person may be dealing with depression or maybe dealing with, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and they need medication and professional help as well as a community of faith, not one or the other. And so it was challenging because I was really hiding from the faith community, even the community that, the church where my dad pastored, where I was active in. And I didn't really talk about it or discuss it. And then you know, for some people, they thought like, oh, you should just come and hear this speaker. They dealt with it and then they got, delivered from it or cured from it. And I'm like, that's not how that works. Like, I know that's not how that works. Uh, but, so yeah, it definitely changed how I interacted with the faith community and just overall my own personal beliefs and interactions in faith. I really took a step back and step away from the faith community and church in general at that time.
Okay. So it wasn't it was just something that you needed to pivot away from during your early recovery days. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you mentioned it being in a Black church. Excuse me, my voice wants to cough. I'm trying not to. So how did that, being an African American male, how did that impact your recovery, and how did that impact the stigma you faced?
So, I mean, as a Black male, usually, and even in the Black community, mental health is kind of looked at as like weakness. You don't really talk about it, um, or having trouble or needing support. Um, there's in relation to that and like what's happening now with the pandemic, there's been so many articles written about how men in general and Black men, but men need more than just sports and other things that stereotypically associated with men, and you know locker room talk, things like that, to cope, or social networks. And so for me, I was never really big into sports. I mean, I go like for the social component, but it's not like something I live for. But in the Black community, yeah, it's like I said, that element of over spiritualizing things versus not really having an avenue to talk. I mean, some of the staples in the Black community are like barbershops, salons, the Black church, um, some of the like more notable ones. And so like you go to the barbershop, I mean, you talk about a number of things. You getting your haircut, you talk about movies that are out, you hear relationship talk, but you rarely hear about like, I've been struggling with this and it's hard to talk to my wife, or dealing with my kids. You don't really hear that much in the Black community, especially among Black males. And, there's not many, I guess, safe spaces or where people, men feel safe to talk. And so that lack of space and that lack of feeling safe really just keeps everyone isolated. And then kind of breeds this, toxic masculinity or hyper masculinity where like everything's fine. I'm just gonna push through, throw some dirt on it, or take a deep breath and man up, and so hear that a lot more than you hear about like, oh, you should go to this program, or have you talked to Nami, or have you talked to any other local agencies about getting help or seeking help, or someone that looks like you can reach out to. So there's not really a lot of talk about resources or what's available, and it just kind of gets buried, or you just either just push through it.
I could see that leading to a cycle of distress where I'm feeling bad and I'm isolating and I'm keeping it on the surface and I'm being told to man up. And so then I'm isolating more. I could see that building on itself in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm glad you found a way out of that. Well, and that leads into our next question. Men are less likely than women to be diagnosed with depression, but 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And we know that's because they use more lethal means, more likely to use firearms, for example. How can we encourage more men to get the care that they need and use a different language when they talk about mental health and their feelings?
I think it's important to frame it as what's beneficial for the individual. I know, like, I had a mentor that was a man when I went back to school. And so when I was first starting medication, or at least was about to begin starting medication and looking into that, he simply said, if this is something that's going to help you, you should really look into it. And it doesn't sound like a revelation, but I mean, just that simple phrase kind of helped me look at like, oh, that's a good point, and it was as simple as that. And we were sitting very casually in a diner, about to eat something, and it really made me think, because up until that point, before starting medication, what I was doing was not working. And basically, I would recover physically and feel okay. I'm like, okay, great, I'm good, let's go, let me do all these classes, let me go meet people, let me run over here. And then of course the decline starts, because the depression, we call that, or unipolar, where you're up here but then you just gradually go down. And so that's what happened. I would just go down and then I'd be down for a while. But when I started medication, I would start to feel down, but I would sit here and the floor would be here, so I wouldn't hit bottom. And so by saying yes to medication, I knew what it was like to not completely bottom out, and I could still function. And that was huge, because up until then I would just basically crash and bottom out. But just by saying yes and opening up to that completely changed things and allowed me to move forward, instead of just trying to push through on my own willpower or physicality.
Mhm.
And I would just say, be open to something different. um, I was open to therapy uh, because I was tired of feeling torn up inside and down. And so that's why I pursued therapy, because I wanted to do something different. And I remember distinctly saying that I wanted to beat this. I didn't want it to beat me when I first started. And that became true because, some of the major things I often talk about, like, one, education was huge. Learning about what depression is and how it manifests for me personally. um, Support systems, such as a support group like Nami provides, or other supportive programs, or friends I could talk to about it. Um, and then a community, being involved with programming or outreach or advocacy in different ways, and lending my voice or my experience, were all different things that help me kind to get better, stay better, but then also give back a little bit about what I've been through, so that, one, other students wouldn't go through that and wouldn't feel like they didn't have any avenue, or parents could be better supportive of their adult children, or really just anyone can explore with getting help and what that looks like, and being able to have more fulfilling relationships, or get their degree if that's what they're doing, or find a great job where they feel uh, valued in and feel good about the work that they're doing. And so, but you can't really do any of that if you're not able to get out the door or even get out of bed, which is what I experienced, early on. So those are just some of the things that I feel are helpful. If any man is considering that, or any person is considering, just looking like, is this going to benefit me in the long run? And what do I have to lose by saying, yes, like, or, what do I have to gain just by saying yes? It's different than what I'm currently doing, which isn't really working well. So, yeah.
Right. I like that your friend didn't attach any labels. He just kept it very straightforward and looking at the cost and the benefit of the medication option. I had a hard time coming to terms with taking medication too. Now I'm on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which is a long way of saying antidepressants. And I bent over backwards not to take meds, but that was exactly what I needed. I could feel the difference within a week, dramatic difference, that I wasn't consumed with darkness. But I tried Toastmasters and yoga, and I jogged and prayed, so many things, but sometimes that is the answer that works. So, all righty. When you were still struggling, what else did you find helpful or unhelpful coming from loved ones?
So some of the things I found helpful were just talking to friends and telling them what was going on. It took me a while to be like just completely honest about what my home life was like and how I was doing. But when I did, I found I had so much more support than I initially thought. I'll never forget one of my good friends, Greg, from college. When I told him what was happening, he was just like, "You're still you, man. You just you just said that." And I was just like, "Thank you for saying that. I don't feel like me all the time, but it was nice hearing that I am still the same person despite what was the changes I was experiencing."
Right.
And then even another good friend, I think really one of my longest, or really say the my friend since high school, Latif, and we still talk to today. He remember telling him what was going on, and he was like, "Really?" At first he was shocked. He's like, "Really, you've been experiencing, you've been dealing with depression and stuff." And so he's like, "Wow." He said, "I never would have thought about that." He's like, "You always seemed like everything was great." And I thought, I was like, I was really good at hiding it. So that was part of it.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess." But then he also told me something I didn't realize when we were in high school, that he had dealt with a lot of mental health issues. And I was like, "I
Okay.
had no idea." He's like, "Exactly." It's like, he's like, "I also hit it pretty well and I didn't talk about it much." And I was like, wow. So it's just like, it just made me think. I said, man, all those times when we were in high school and I had no idea. But he said one of the things though that he looked forward to coming every day was just being able to talk to me. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. Um, so I mean, that put things into perspective for me. And then in a way, he was there for me during those really dark times. Some of the things that weren't helpful, I think my parents were trying to be helpful. Uh, when I initially came home and they told me about really some of the trauma they went through growing up. And I don't know where they were trying to go with that, but that wasn't really helpful. But it was like, okay, it's like, it's
Oh,
actually like about me, but you're kind of telling me something in a way, in a backwards kind of way, like we had this really horrible stuff happen, but we persevere, we pushed through. And I'm like,
Okay.
Like,
You think
I
you have
don't
it bad.
really, I was like, you might want to look again because like I don't really think things, things work out, but I don't think things are working all the time. Like, there's a difference between things, worked out versus, working well. And so I don't think they really got that. I think it was just, yeah, they were trying to do something there that didn't really work. But anyway, so that wasn't as helpful. And what also wasn't helpful were people trying to tell me, oh, you should just come to church and, come back to church or come to church with us. Or like, oh, there's this woman speaking about, like I said, depression and anxiety and how she doesn't feel depressed anymore. Or, she started praying or something. And suddenly it was, she was, wiped, was wiped away from her. And I'm just like, it's like not that I want to take away from whatever worked for her or whatever happened. And, I wish her the best, but I was like, I don't think that's going to help me, so they were trying, I was like, they were trying to be helpful, and then, sometimes you hear people say too, like, oh, I get the blues too sometimes. I'm like, yeah, but do you get it for months at a time? Like, versus just like a week or two, you had a bad week. I was like, mine lasts for months, maybe a year, longer. And so, yeah, that's not the same thing. So, so I mean, people mean well, they're trying to, but I'm like, they're like I said, it goes back to education and learning how to really be helpful to a friend or a family member, where you realize that's the, everyday blues or versus clinical depression or generalized anxiety. These panic disorders or mood disorders is very different. So, but not helpful, but they were trying. And I could see the effort behind that.
Right, right. And that's a good point. Sometimes a person's intentions are all there. People do what they know, and we don't provide enough opportunities for people to get really literate with mental health. So they do know how to be helpful. So they do what they know. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's great and sometimes not so much. So
Right.
exactly. All right. What else have we got here? Were there any defining moments in your story that made your recovery work or hindered it?
Defining moments. I'd say like defining moments for me were really when I started going to the connection meetings. Like really, at like now, I feel like it's been almost, well, it will have been like 7 years this year since I started going. So it's like, wow, how much time has passed. Uh, but when I started going, I remember I was fresh out of therapy, new to the area, and the only thing I really had to look forward to were those group meetings every week. And it was just so affirming and validating going to the meetings. Like initially, I was quiet, if you can believe that, early on,
No, no, I cannot.
but I was pretty quiet because like for any new support group member, it can be a little overwhelming. I mean, the fact that you showed up and made it is a accomplishment in itself. But those early days, just really hearing people I had no connection with basically talk about my experience was powerful. And feeling supported too and understood and like, oh my God, like, yes, like these people are annoying or, or like I want to throw something or like it's okay that I feel that way. Like, don't actually want to do it, don't actually do it because that's frowned upon on civilized society. But, but it's at least, being in the group, like, at least feel supported in that feeling. Um, and so, yeah, those early days going to group, meeting people and talking and having that outlet was huge. And I stopped feeling less and less isolated. Um, and then, another turning point was I remember, well, it was really like you and Johari, who is still, involved with the Franklin County here in Columbus. When you guys approached me to be a facilitator, and I was like, oh, like, okay, like that's an option, you know. And I hadn't really thought about it. I was just like, oh, okay, I guess I could do that. But really, actually, I got ahead of myself. Before then, when you told me about an opportunity to go to the national convention, that was really big. Nami's national convention back in 2014, and that was we were in Washington D.C. that year.
Yeah.
And so I remember you said there was an opportunity, like a scholarship or a way to go for free. And so I was like, okay, you know, once again saying yes, just going with it. And so that was amazing. I think it was the first time being at a conference like that, being in a hotel and walking around with like family members and other people who were talking about mental health and who had mental health challenges. And we were openly talking, wearing them, like I have anxiety, you know, like just wearing it, really proud. And, you know, feeling so, and I just remember feeling free for the first time in a long time, free to express that and free to be, you know, out and proud in a sense about it, you know. um and that was just really, yeah, one, you know, I met so many great people I still talk to and reconnected with, like at the last convention, which that we had in person, which was in Seattle in 2019. Reconnected with people I hadn't seen in a while, and you know that check in with periodically on social media, and so that was huge. So I mean, those are just some of the handful moments I remember where things were shifting, and just the fact that I could use my lived experience to help others and even get paid for it. You know, that I was like, oh, you get paid doing this? Like okay, like sign me up. You know,
Yeah.
so I had no idea that was a thing until talking to you, or you know, meeting other, you know, the Nami staff at Ohio, and really talking to other peers too, who were like, oh, you should look into this program, see if your state has it, or you know, this certification would be really cool. Like I think all the states have. You should look into. They were talking about being a certified peer recovery supporter, and every state has some form of that. I think now it is called the same thing now, well, mostly. But using your lived experience with mental health to, you know, work with, have a caseload, work in hospitals and work with medical staff, or even work with agencies that are helping others get into recovery and programs. And so that just opened my eyes to so many things and allowed me to work and kind of build up my resume, you know, because for the long, you know, that was huge too, because, you know, I was a student and then had to restart over everything and figure out which direction my life was going to go in. And so that just opened up a lot. It allowed me to, you know, start volunteering more and, you know, filling in that resume and getting experience and uh, going to new, you know, conferences or meetings and meeting different people and learning about the different supportive services in my area and how they work together, how they work separately. So those were some like really defining moments in, you know, my recovery and then just overall journey of advocacy.
Mhm. Yeah, that resonates with me as well. And I remember that 2014 trip to DC. A bunch of us were walking. Remember the hotel had like a long sloped
Oh yeah, it had
sidewalk,
that. Yeah.
and we're all in this crowd, and we're all like, "Oh, where'd Quentin go? Where'd Quentin go?" And there was a board member who was like 80 years old who had fallen and twisted her ankle, and you were like 100 yards back walking with her, making sure she was okay.
Oh yeah.
We said, "Oh, he's as nice as he seems." That's really awesome. But also that feeling of liberation that comes with being able to talk with other people who've been through the same thing. That it's
Mhm.
one thing to have someone say, I'm so sorry you've been stuck in that dark room for years, and it must be terrible to feel like you're stuck in a dark room," versus people who have been in that dark room with you. Just it's night and day, to pick a phrase. All right. So do you have anything oh, Quentin is Gary's new hero. All right.
Thanks, Gary.
Thought I was your hero. All right, whatever. So do you have anything you want to say before we move on to the next section of our show? Anything you want to say before you forget?
Um, just to share a quote and this isn't mine. This was from a group member that actually passed. He died by suicide. But his name was Ian Hoffman. And he would always say, you are one of your loved ones. And it's something I always remind our group of here in Ohio. And, when they talk about how do I get back out there? Or what do I say when I'm, going back to work? Or what do I say to my friends that I've been doing? And so I just, tell them, like, reminded that you are one of your loved ones, people that you care about, that you yourself are on that list, and to be kind to yourself, to, be gracious to yourself and be patient with yourself, no matter where you are on your recovery journey, whether it's just getting out of bed each day or whether it's, going back to work or whether it's getting out and making new friends, just, be kind and remember that you're worth it.
All right. Well, that's very thoughtful and perfect note to end this segment on. So with that, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to wrap up the interview portion of our show. Thank you for that, Quentin. Before we move on to our video of the week, a big shout out to the folks working behind the scenes. We've got our mental health intern, Patience Greg, and tech intern, Eddie Simmons on tech support, executive director, Gary Kreitz, for always being there. Thank you to all of you. And of course, thanks to Quentin for spending time with us. Tonight, we've got a very brief and lighthearted video of the week. Now, this does not have the polish that tech intern Eddie would have given it. I just did this today, but I hope it gives you a smile anyways. Here we go. We have a new mascot with Nami, North Carolina, and I'm going to introduce you to her. Her name's June.
Hey. Good girl. This is June, our new mascot.
All right. So it just kind of kept it to the point, and that's a teaser. I'm sure we'll have many more videos of June coming up in future episodes. And now we're going to have time for your questions, virtual studio audience. If you're newer to Zoom and you're wondering how to ask a question, you want to click on the conversation bubble towards the bottom of your monitor that says Q&A. Type your question. It will be magically delivered to us. And there's something in the chat box that's been there that Quentin, you mentioned your parents didn't understand what was going on with you initially, and the response was not helpful, as you explained. What advice would you give to parents that want to be helpful to their young adult child with depression and anxiety, and how hands-on should a parent be? Should they nudge you to get out of bed, for example?
Okay. So a couple of things. So shameless plug, family to family, family support group, Nami family support group. So family to family is an education class, and it talks about how to really be supportive and be there for a family member or a loved one. And I've actually spoken at family to family as a peer, kind of giving my insight what it was like once. But it's great, program to help you understand, I think, diagnosis, what that looks like, symptoms, best way to help. And then there's family support group, which is a support group for family members, dealing with a loved one, and get to meet with other parents and loved ones and talk about the issues you've encountered, even how you're processing it. So those are some great resources to take advantage of. And then just in general, like, day to day, like for me, I knew my parents, my dad was trying to keep me from just, sleeping all day, which was great, but not initially when I needed to sleep. So trying to wake me up when I really did need to sleep wasn't helpful. But I understood what he was just concerned. He felt like he needed to do something. Once again, the intention behind the action. And so also I would just say, like, do something that is beneficial for your loved one. So if you know that they haven't been doing with things that they once enjoyed, which is very common with depression, like such as, spending time with their friends, or, even listening to music that they used to listen to, or getting out to a park or something, talk to them and see like what, like, maybe phrasing, saying like, what would be helpful, or what would need to happen in order for you to do this again, or to get back into this. That's a better way, rather than, kind of saying, why aren't you doing this? Why can be loaded and puts people on defensive, but saying like, what would need to happen, or what would it look like if we were to do this, is different, change of phrasing, but then also comes off as you trying to be helpful and caring about things that they actually, that that they enjoyed or used to enjoy. So that's actually helpful. I mean, simple trips to like going to the grocery store can be fine. Like just low pressure, like, hey, you want to come to the store with me? Or you want to take a ride with me? I'm going to go run some errands. You feel like, getting some air with me? That's fine. As long as it's not all just, your errands or things that need to get done. I could get old really quickly. But those are just some things I would suggest doing to kind of help, get someone out and moving around a little bit. And then also, like I said, focusing on things that they enjoy and getting them back, or at least doing one or two things in a week, maybe that they haven't done in some time, or you haven't seen them done and do in a while. So was there another part? I feel like I'm missing another part of that question.
Got it. How can they be helpful, and how, should they nudge? How active should they be?
Oh yeah, I would really kind of gauge. You don't want to push someone to the point where they just stop engaging with you altogether. Like a little nudge is great, but taking it too far where like you're not really considering their feelings or their energy levels isn't helpful, because when you're depressed or anxious, it's like, when you're depressed, you really have low energy and there's only so much you want to do. So I mean, just transparent, like in the pandemic, I got depressed like at a point, and I actually had a mild case of COVID, and so that plus being locked up, uh, really, I was really down. And so my girlfriend had to be there for me, and so one of the things she did is like, hey, you want to come downstairs and watch TV with me? And so, I got out of bed, I went and we watched something on Hulu for a while, up until a point where I just was just kind of like over it, and I went back upstairs. But she just said, well, thanks for hanging out with me, for a little bit. And so that was helpful. It got me out of the bedroom, it got me out of bed, got me moving a little bit. And that was an example of something that was helpful, like, instead of just lying around and isolating myself. She got me up and encouraged me to do something with her. So that's an example. I would say it's helpful, but not overly strenuous. It's like, versus like, hey, you want to do some yard work? Come out here. And like, not so much. That's not gonna happen as easily. So
Yeah, that seems like a perfect ask for someone who's struggling. You're not leaving the house. You're not going to get overstimulated. It's
right,
like a very safe and gentle invitation.
right.
Yeah. To piggyback on what you said, I would say be prepared to hear no. I had a family member live with me for a time who was experiencing depression. And initially, he said yes to everything because he was being polite. And then when he was more in his comfort zone with me as a person, he declined just about every invitation because it was very overstimulating for him. It was too much. And, that's okay. That's a really important thing, is to respect the answer you get.
Right.
All right, another question here from Gary. Even though I know better as a Christian, I periodically have to fight against the feeling that my depression has a spiritual cause and therefore a spiritual solution. How does the church get beyond that stigma? Nice little softball for you.
Yeah. I'm pleased to say that the church has actually come a long way. There are many ministers that I know, at least in I'll just speak for like the Franklin County, Columbus area, that have what we call, like, was it oh man, I'll probably have to give the proper name later, but it's more like faith and mental health meetings that we have. So like NAMI partnered with some of the ministerial alliances have come together to have like a day of self-care for ministers, but then also provide resources for their communities. And so that's been really helpful, where ministers have, one, taken that support, but then also provide either brochures and even programming. Like we have NAMI FaithNet. That's a program that you can bring into the church, as well as Sharing Hope, that I think is still available in some areas, that it's really geared toward the Black community, but can be in Black churches and other areas or community centers. And so really like the FaithNet and some of the and programs like Sharing Hope have helped bridge that divide, since it's really catered to the faith communities and other communities. So that's been really helpful in kind of bridging the faith versus science debate, where you can have both at the same time with the help of, organizations like NAMI, and providing those resources right there in the church. So like brochures can be there in their annex, or wherever they have like other community pamphlets or sheets, it would be right there for the members to take advantage of.
Yeah, it is inspiring how far so many churches have come to open their doors and to try to understand mental health first aid or NAMI classes and support groups, so that they can offer real tools for the toolkit and real helpful solutions. So you've got some accolades in the chat box from Suzanne Botts, and there's a note that was sent just a panelist, so I'm not sure if I should say your name, ma'am, but thanking Quentin for sharing his story, and that it resembles the story her oldest son went through before he unfortunately died from a car crash. But she feels so grateful to have seen his recovery before that happened. And Quentin, according to this lady, you found your true calling. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts and your insights in the chat box. If you have another question, let us know. In the meantime, I'll plug some of the program we have coming up in future weeks. We've got a fantastic, another depression story, a very different storyteller, Carlita Victoria, who currently lives in Raleigh, but studied theater and ended up working off Broadway. She did extremely well, but found that something was missing. That something was her joy. She was living with depression and really had to go through a long, heavy recovery. Today, she pulls together other Broadway stars to do singing and choreography videos. And then at the end, someone shares their story of recovery from mental illness. That's on February 11th. On the 18th, the following Thursday, we will have a conversation with psychiatric nurse practitioners. You probably know, if you've sought help in the mental health arena, that there's a severe shortage of psychiatrists and mental health professionals. Psychiatric nurse practitioners are picking up a lot of that slack because they can prescribe medication and because they can meet that demand. So come and learn from their insights. They're on the front lines of this public health crisis. And finally, we've got another author on the last Thursday of the month, Joanne Mccally. She's an elite level NCAA basketball coach. She worked most recently for Duke University, so another North Carolina connection. And she's recently disclosed that she herself lives with bipolar disorder. She's written a book about her story, Secret Warrior, a coach and fighter on and off the court. So we would love to see you in the future. All right, another question from Gary. I like this one. If you could go back and tell your 15-year-old self something, what would it be?
Ooh.
We have a half hour.
Yeah, like how much time you got? I guess I don't know. Well, I think, yeah. I guess I would say don't be afraid to get help. I would say that don't be afraid to get help. Probably more specifically, I'd be like, don't be definitely follow up with Dean Carter your sophomore year because that's when she first like she posed the question, you think you might be dealing with depression? I was like, oh no, it's not that bad. Then like a year later, I'm like, actually, I came back. You think you may be onto something. So so
Can we revisit that question?
right. So yeah. But yeah, I'd say don't be afraid to pursue that if I could go back in time and tell myself something helpful.
Sure. What gives you hope?
I feel hopeful about the future. Been really impressed with a lot of younger adults that I've met and worked with who are really trying to destroy the stigma altogether around mental health. I've, uh, when I was working in the state office as a consultant on grants, I had the privilege of really mentoring some sixth graders who were doing a community project, and they did it on mental health and the different diagnoses. And I spoke to them and featured them on our web or really Facebook page at the time. But it was just really powerful because, in that gymnasium, I not only saw mental health, but about autism and a range of issues that we're dealing with in our world today. And so it just gave me a lot of hope because when I was their age, we were really just starting to talk about cancer more commonly. And so now, all these years later, seeing that, mental health and a range of topics are being discussed more openly, um, and as, subject matters for, projects and community outreach. And so that gives me hope. Also, working with high school students who did their graduation project on mental health and bringing resources into their high school when they had some unfortunate losses in their community that they felt could have been prevented. And so partnering up with their, counselor and their principal and trying to get more information like Nami brochures and programming into the schools. And college students here at the Ohio State University, they were trying to advocate and get more counseling sessions for students because were really overwhelmed with the student population. The campus services couldn't really handle it all. And so really looking at the next generation, or really well, not even the next generation. I actually hated that when I was younger, but really right now, there are so many kids, teenagers, young adults doing things right now and not waiting till they get older to tackle issues such as mental health stigma, that are just so impressive and so passionate. And it gives me hope that we will try to eliminate this as, and other issues in our society a lot sooner rather than later. So that gives me hope.
So we're virtual studio audience. We do have time, but we tend to go with the energy of the group. If another question pops up, we will answer it. And the chat box is really cracking me up. Come to North Carolina, Quentin. We need you, from Gary. And then, no, we're keeping Quentin in Ohio. After all, we lost Peg, from Jack Sherman. Jack Sherman was on the board and probably still is at Nami, Ohio. I'm not sure. Since I abandoned Ohio after all. My apologies.
Yes,
Okay.
he's still, yeah, he stepped down as president. We have a new president, but he's still on board with us. So as a president.
All right, good to know we're in demand, you and I, Quentin. Is there a book, movie, or song that has inspired you?
Oh, one of the books that I have in my library is called Black Pain. It Only Looks Like We're Not Hurting, and that's by Terry M. Williams, and she specifically speaks to mental health, depression in the Black community, and it's very well written. A lot of resources. It's still a really great book, so I really liked that book early on when I was still in recovery early on. and transitioning into advocacy support groups. It's a great book.
Sounds like the right book at the right time. It really spoke to you. Okay. Well, it seems that our energy is winding down, and that is perfectly fine. I wonder sometimes if we should make this a 60-minute show or 90. I don't know. I hate to cut short. But if you fill out our evaluation survey, give me your thoughts on that, please, virtual studio audience members. I'd appreciate it. For now, though, it seems that another evening has flown by. Again, I want to thank our behind the scenes helper, and thank you so much, Quentin, for sharing your insights. It's wonderful to see you again.
Yes, thank you. This was great. And as I'm writing, I will definitely come to North Carolina. I actually met some wonderful people at the last convention who happened to be from North Carolina. So I was like, oh, you got Peg from us. When I met him. But anyway. Yeah,
Gary just offered you my job.
You're never gonna live that down, Peg. Yeah.
Gary just offered you my job. So there's all kinds of opportunities down here. I'm thrilled to say. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. It's been a wonderful show. And remember, in the week ahead, go where you need to go, do what you need to do, but absolutely be safe. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. Oh, and there's a question about where to find the survey. It should appear when you leave this meeting. Otherwise, you'll receive an email from yours truly saying, please, please, please fill out the survey. All right. This is my final goodbye now. I'm serious. Thank you. Good night.